Hello, investors. This is Todd Thomas, Associate Portfolio Manager with Revere Asset Management. Today is Saturday, April 26th at 2:25 p.m., coming to you from Boca Raton, Florida, to bring you the Revere Roundup weekend walkthrough. Well, we had a pretty big change this week compared to last week. We went from the four loathed red arrows to now two green up arrows on both the leaders as well as the short-term 21 EMA. Both indexes are now above the short-term 21 EMA. We staged a follow-through day on Tuesday of this week, and we had another follow-through day on Wednesday, and we closed up all 4 days after Monday. However, we are still below the medium 50-day moving average as well as the long-term 200-day moving average on the indexes. Some of last week's highlights, more market related here. Monday started off with an opening gap down and a trend down day to close at the lowest level since 410. From Trump making comments about too late Powell and threats of replacing him. We also note that Bitcoin stood out on Monday with a gap up open. On Tuesday, we launched a day 11 follow-through day with the S&P 500 up 2.51% on higher but below average volume. GROTECTION bought Netflix and Palantir on the follow-through day action. The rally was fueled by shifting rhetoric from the White House on tariffs and de-escalation and selective tariff rollbacks. The rally extended on Wednesday through Friday with an additional follow-through day on Wednesday, closing at the lower end of the range. We also had a notable rare Zweig breath thrust, which occurred on Thursday. There's been 18 signals since World War II, and the market has never been lower 6 and 12 months after these signals. So this is one of the best signals that I've ever seen after following the severe bearish, extreme negative sentiment from a few weeks ago to now a Zweig breath thrust is a very positive confirmation, along with two follow-through days this week. We also confirmed the Zweig breath thrust with a Whaley thrust on Friday. And I'm going to show you those two, the stats on those two particular thrusts. We also attribute this strength to stronger than expected earnings reports, especially in technology, and strong earnings reactions from Netflix, ServiceNow, SAP, Tesla, GEV, and APH, which helped further fuel gains. Also, durable good orders came in with a surprise 9.2% increase when the expectations were for a 1.8% increase, along with strong University of Michigan consumer sentiment that came out on Friday. Going over the Zweig breath thrust, this is from Brian Dietrich at Carson. You can see where both on this column as well as this column, these are the 18 occurrences post-World War II, and every single one has been green with an average of the S&P gaining 14.8% and 23.4% after 12 months. Very positive. Okay. This is the Whaley breath thrust. A little bit different parameters, but similar. This is the column with the 6-month performance, and this is a column with the 12 months performance. There have been some negatives, 2001, 2002, and 2008, as well as 2022 in the 6-month column, but only one negative 12-month occurrence back in 2001. So this is also encouraging to see both these indicators go off this week. Insider buying to selling, actually this is the exact opposite, which is being plotted below here. This is the ratio of the Vickers insider sells over buys. So down here shows a big increase in insider buying. So this is the biggest amount of insider buying we've seen since 2022, 2020, 2018. Not as extreme as 2020, but just confirmation that insiders are in fact buying despite Trump's policies that have many people fearful of the market. Okay, this is the University of Michigan probability of the stock market going higher over the next 12 months. It's at a record 12% of participants are showing that they believe the market cannot go higher over the next 12 months. So this is an indicator that flashed this week, which is another fear indicator at a record extreme. And just another notable slide here. This shows how the S&P 500 is trailing its international peers by the most in 32 years. So in 32 years, we've never seen the S&P 500 trail the international markets to this extent. And this segues into the performance of the international markets. Most notable, Mexico up 23% now on the year, Brazil up 19%, Germany up 23%, France up 14%, and those are in South Africa up 15.4%. So some big outperformance in the international markets, with the Nasdaq now down 10% and the S&P down 6.1%. On the week, these are the big gainers in the S&P 500. Biggest gainers came from the Magnificent Seven. In particular, the semiconductor sector had probably the largest gains, but you can see the Mag 7 with Tesla being the leader up 18% post week earnings. On the downside, T-Mobile was down 11%. United Health fell an additional 7% on top of a terrible week the week before. Eli Lilly up 5%. And then some modest gains in the financials and insurance area. Some mixed returns in the consumer defensive area. And muted returns elsewhere, but the big standouts were in technology last week. And in the ETF front, the S&P was up 4.6%. The semiconductor index was up 10.9%. VIX was down 11%, which is a good sign. Gold had its first weekly downturn after several straight up weeks in a row. Silver stood out and reversed course with gold and diverged. And the rest, the bond markets were relatively up on the week. So again, big standout again in technology. Year to date, we still have the Mag 7 down substantially. This is not my particular grounds for new buys, nor Revere's particular ground for new buys. As you can see, these are still substantially down on the year, with Tesla being the most at 29%. Netflix stood out this week with huge earnings 2 weeks ago on Thursday, and then it opened up on Monday of this week for a huge 23% gain. GE stood out also. Or I'm sorry, that's on the year, but you can see Netflix is up, because of this week's activity. Lilly's up nicely this year. Philip Morris is up nicely. So Berkshire Hathaway. For the week of April 24th, this upcoming week, over 35% of the S&P components are reporting. So this is the second biggest week outside of next week after. This week will represent 40% of the S&P 500 market cap stocks reporting. And again, this huge week will be led off by Domino's Pizza, as well as Visa, Starbucks, Pfizer, Spotify. We've got Cat, Microsoft, Meta, Robinhood, and Eli Lilly, Amazon, Apple, all big names, Airbnb, Reddit, McDonald's, and then some energy stocks on Friday. lot of economic numbers coming out next week. Most notably, we've got a lot of employment numbers coming for the first of the month, the ADP number, the ISM manufacturing, non-farm payrolls, and as well as the Fed's PCE number, which is their most coveted inflation gauge. So again, big week of economic numbers after a big gain this week. Well, just briefly revisiting the death cross, we made a low 7 days into this most recent death cross, which started on 4/14. So far, we've gone down an average or to that low of minus 5.63%. So if this low holds and we have found a bottom, this would be the second shortest as well as shallowest drop after when the signal triggered since COVID, which was only 5 days and a minus 3.7. So this would be the second at 7 days. As you can see, we have usually gone over a month on the short-term side. So this will be interesting to see how this develops and whether we end up retesting. But so far, with the Whaley breath thrusts and the follow-through days, very good sign this week. Now let's go to the indexes on the week. S&P up 4.59%. Again, if we look at the week, we can see Monday's big gap down open on Trump's rhetoric over the weekend on wanting to fire Powell, followed up by decreased rhetoric as well as some good earnings reactions fueled by Tesla on Tuesday night, as well as ServiceNow, SAP. You can see we rallied every single day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Reclaimed 21 EMA. Now we have the 50 and the 200 overhead. The 50-day moving average is now a couple percent above. Still below all these averages, so a lot of work to do. But again, looking back at what happened here, yeah, the big washout low here on the what day was that? The 7th, followed by this huge rally of over 10%. Then a big retracement into that wick with a big negative 1600 downtick reading at the lows of this day. Then we rallied, could not get through the 21, came back and on Monday undercut this day, but closed above it. So this to me was a pivotal day with that post big day pullback, big downtick reading showing a washout sell again to confirm that bottom. Then a retest of it, undercut, reclaim on to 2 follow-through days on Tuesday, Wednesday, even though Wednesday did get rejected and closed at the low. So this did not feel great, because there was only like Netflix and Palantir showing huge strength, as well as Bitcoin on Monday and throughout the week. But as the week went on, Thursday and Friday just continued to gain steam. So here we go onto the NASDAQ, up 6.73% on the week. And again, all these indexes have the 200 days and the 50 days overhead, but reclaim the 20 and the 21-day moving average as well as the 8 EMA. Q's similar, but right on the 20-week moving average. RSP with 3 green weeks in a row. The equal weight again into the 20 week, or the 10 week rather. The Russell and the VIX was down 16.2% on the week. We came back down and to the 50-day moving average on the VIX, which is relatively insignificant, but below 30 for the last 3 days of the week, which is very positive. The dollar was flat on the week. Bond yields dropped on the week, 4.266 on the 10-year. And Bitcoin with a huge week. Again, just going back and looking at this, looking at the post-election week, you can see how we were able to, on a weekly basis, really close right at that gap up post-election week, held, and then broke through in very bullish fashion this week, every day with an up week. Now the short-term moving averages coming up through the 50-day, with the 50-day now starting to flatten out over the next week and eventually turning up. We all took positions in this, Ted and Connor and Turbo last week, Don and GROTECTION, and me personally on Monday as well. Semiconductors with recovering the last few weeks, which is bullish. GLD with a down week, which it was due for. Silver stood out this week and diverged from gold. Still not able to break out, but did have a pretty decent week. And the GDX miners down on the week. Europe with a big up week, almost back to highs, up 4.95%. The Magnificent Seven, again, right into this resistance up here. So, again, my expectations are pretty neutral on the Mag 7, as I don't think they're going to lead in this particular rally, but we'll get into the ones we think are going to lead. Now let's go on to look at the individual charts of the Mag 7. Tesla, despite a miss, the lowest gross margin in years, as well as lowered expectations, big week and a big gain on Friday. So again, one of the most bullish things you can see is negative earnings and news, bullish price action. And you can see on Wednesday post earnings, stock gapped open, and then had a huge 9.8% day on Friday. Again, below the 200-day moving average, but stock basically held these lows, made a higher low and a higher high. The video with recovery, still a lot of work to do with the downward sloping averages ahead, but has reclaimed its 8 and 21 EMA. Meta with earnings coming up this week. Alphabet with an earnings gap, but closed at the lower end of its range. Earnings were basically ahead of expectations across the board. I believe YouTube was slightly below expectations, but again, they're in a big battle with the FTC, who may divide this company up. So who knows what's going to happen here, but stock's kind of muted with the government looking to break potentially some of their parts up. Amazon with earnings next week, and Microsoft also with earnings next week. So, and Apple with earnings next week as well. So most all of the Magnificent Seven will be reporting, with NVIDIA left next month. And finally, let's get into the watch list for this week. Incidentally, last week's watch list proved to be very excellent for the follow-through day week. Again, I have this sorted by industry group. Cardinal Health is number 2 industry group. Again, defensive name, but still had a positive week. Philip Morris had earnings, or has earnings coming up this week, 2 weeks tight. Netflix, again, reported the week after, but after the close, and opened Monday with a gap up, but closed in the lower end on a weekday for the market, but then powered through this double bottom break and broke out. And really, out of all the stocks, is currently the leader of the large cap growth stocks, with a nice perfect double bottom base breakout and new all-time closing high. So GROTECTION bought this early in the week, as well as myself. Another one, Kratos Defense, with a tight week of 1.51%. Earnings next week in a stage 1 base, Trello Stream making new highs. This one doesn't quite meet our liquidity requirements yet, but had a very powerful move. And you can see this was new IPO lower back in April of 24. Had a pretty successful post IPO run, peaked at 96.99, built this 36% deep cup with handle and broke out on Thursday, and currently closed just shy of all-time highs of 96.99, just out of the pivot zone. But this is a very encouraging action out of an IPO, and has some decent triple-digit earnings, above 20% sales growth. So this has good canceling characteristics. Rocket Lab's not making any money yet, but on a more speculative name that did break through its 50-day moving average, but has some work to do. Earnings in 2 weeks. Howmet Aerospace, relative straight, making new highs with a very strong showing this week. Getting close to the double bottom base breakout pivot with earnings next week. Icky Bank, talked about this the last couple of weeks, down on the week. Take-Two Interactive, which has been one of my favorite stocks. Unfortunately, have not gotten back into it, but had a nice breakout after this shakeout here the week of the washout lows, but again, broke through somewhat of a double bottom base as well here, and is still in the buy zone. So I may hopefully try to get that on a pullback next week. LRN with earnings next week, relative strength making new highs. Sprouts looks like another one that could be a new leader after a pretty big run last year, building a nice cup base here. CrowdStrike, the security stock, stood out. Connor talked about this on our Friday podcast, but broke out of a cup with handle base this week. Rubric, again, new IPO, a little bit sloppier, newer name, had this nice earnings gap back here, but just couldn't hold up with the market forces as we corrected, building this double bottom base, but good action last week overall. Zscaler, nice, clean and simple base here, along with the rest of the cybersecurity names. Again, could be a buy through this nice, clean and simple base breakout area. So you can see several names in the cybersecurity area look good. Root in the insurance area broke out of, well, really no breakout, but a little choppy here, but showing some relative strength. Spotify with a double bottom base breakout and earnings next week. This is also one of the strongest stocks, and in terms of large cap institutional quality, this is right up there with the top names that we like. Duolingo had very strong reaction to a Morgan Stanley upgrade on Wednesday and held, but earnings next week. This can be a volatile name, but it can also move. They're a leader in the AI area for language, teaching and learning. Dutch Brothers with a decent week, not much volume, but this is a fundamental name we like. I've discussed potentially taking a position in this above this downtrend line, which it broke out on Wednesday and made some progress. So the starter position is possibly in order here. But again, earnings coming up in a couple weeks. Guardian Health looking great with a blue dot. Axon with progress on the week. Although I don't love this drop it had here. And, you know, to me, it needs a lot more work, but I do like the company fundamentally. Geo tried breaking out of this nice little clean and simple base area here. So pretty decent day on Friday with a 2.4% gain. Backed off a little bit. Volume was a little bit light. TKO just kind of building a little base here. MicroStrategy with a huge gain on the week, up 16%. Again, rallying along with Bitcoin and leading Bitcoin. Connor and Ted own this name. LNG with a 2 weeks of tight action here. Celsius with basically 4 week tight. Earnings coming out in a few weeks here, but again, trading very tight and quietly above its 50 and 200-day moving average. Now we're going to have a golden cross of the 50 crossing above the 200-day this week. So this looks like pretty bullish, nice quiet action on the week. Robinhood earnings this coming week. I took a position in this right here on post follow through day. Closed a little bit weak below the 20-day, but continue to make progress through the week. I'm going to hold a small position in the earnings, but really broke out of this flawed double bottom base this week on good action and good volume. Carpenter Technology was a standout on earnings this week. Broke through this double bottom base, just barely above the pivot. Potentially a name to watch in the specialty metal alloy area. They supply a lot of the aerospace industry, so this is potentially a name to keep an eye on with a blue dot here post earnings. Looks very good. Make My Trip, Indian name. Walmart, still hanging in there. Palantir, this is another name Don put on right here. And it followed through nicely. So this is, again, compared to the Mag 7, this is definitely a leader and one of our top names for follow-through day action. SAP in the German software area had a nice earnings gap. Overall decent action there, showing software area holding up well. Carvana with a 12% gain on the week. eBay continues to have a blue dot and slight progress on the week. DoorDash still working on this double bottom base. Chewy with a nice week. Post earnings 2 weeks ago, building this cup base. Big recovery play here. Keeping an eye on it with a nice cup base in progress. MELI, the Brazilian Amazon with good action. Earnings in 2 weeks. Toast, trying to reclaim its longer-term moving averages here. Still below its 20-week moving average, but above the 50-day. And again, a name to keep an eye on in the upcoming weeks as they are a leader in the restaurant, software, and payment space. Penumbra, this is a stock I took a big position in this week on the post-earnings gap. What I liked about this is it gapped open right here, reversed hard, undercut the previous day's lows, reclaimed. And another thing I like about this is the huge volume that it traded on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So big volume going into this. Nice tight closing action throughout the correction and a nice double bottom base breakout with 32% earnings growth. So again, we'll see if this can follow through. Boston Scientific is an earnings gap play this week. Double bottom base. TGTX, another stock I've been talking about a lot that I have a position in the MS treatment space, showing not much volume, but up 7.85% on the week. WGS with a nice relative strength making new highs on the week, up 16%. Earnings this week. The options are showing a 20% move on earnings, so this one will either be a big breakout or get knocked back into the low of the base here, but it's been holding up very well, and they're into the diagnostic testing area for, I believe, a lot of children's diseases. EDMA, another biotech, which had a great showing this week. Excelis, another biotech with relative strength making new highs. Arginex, another biotech with relative strength making new highs. This seems to be a very, very strong area with 5 decent names. Bellring brand with 3 weeks tight, earnings in a couple weeks. Williams Company in the natural gas area, tight. guide wire software with a double bottom base setup and a blue dot. Eli Lilly with some nice follow through post their phase 3 results of their oral pill. Broke above the 200-day moving average. I took a position in this on Thursday as it broke above the 200-day moving average, and it showed immediate progress, which is a good sign. Again, setting up in a big double bottom base, stage 1. Bitcoin we talked about, but very strong action. This shouldn't be in here, doesn't trade enough volume, but incidentally, this is in the data center construction area, and we did see some early turns in a lot of data center names, which I'll go over at the end. Uber very strong this week. Lifetime holdings with a relative strength making new highs. Comfort Systems, this is a data center cooling play, had positive earnings reaction. This is one of the names. Encompass Health with a huge breakout this week. Amphenol, which sells connectors for data centers and fiber optic cables, very positive reaction to earnings. So another data center name showing good action. And this GEV here, GEV is another data center power name, which had positive earnings. This is a stock I took a position in here and powered through and got immediate progress on. So overall, a lot of names to choose from. Good action this week. Coming into some big levels here with the 200 and the 50-day moving averages overhead on the indexes, as well as a majority of the Mag 7 reporting this week. So we will see what the week ahead brings. We could see some digestion. But that brings this week's weekend review to a close. And again, my name is Todd. If you have any questions, email me at todd@revereasset.com. Please subscribe to me on Twitter at ToddMichael70. And if you'd like to become a client and discuss our GROTECTION and TurboTection programs, please call and ask for Dan Stewart or Don Vandenberg at 855-REAL-WEALTH. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.